I guess we can start. Good evening and welcome to the 5th edition of the Support Local Art Talk series organized by Saskia Fernando Gallery. This series is titled Resisting, Reacting, Responding and Rebelling, Art in and Art as Protest. And in the inaugural and first episode of the 5th edition of the series, I'm delighted to be joined by Professor Jagath Weerasinghe, who I talked with earlier this year as well. And we are joined again in the context of Impetus, an exhibition that is, at the time that we are recording this, ongoing at the Saskia Fernando Gallery, and it will be going on till the 30th of this month. So if you haven't gone and seen it, at least for those who can go and see it in Colombo, please do so. It's a Saskia Fernando Gallery, and it's curated by Mariam Begum. Jagath, great to have you again, and welcome to the conversation, I suppose.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for having me, inviting me.
Well, you know, it's always a conundrum, also because I'm not in the country. One is, of course, the desire to see what's up there and the inability to see it. But the conundrum is, and we talked about this for those of you on the live stream over the weekend, is, you know, where do we start and where do we end in terms of a conversation around your art? Impetus is your 90s art, so I don't know that and see it again, you know, so many years and decades since you first created it. But I did want to, in the context of what you're presenting and what has been presented from the work from decades ago, and a very different Sri Lanka as well, kind of maybe take us through the time and then bring you back, or bring everybody back to 2023 and the events of 2022 in particular. So I don't have a set pathway through some of the questions and issues that I have, Jagath, for you, but you know, one of the things that has been written about your work, and I suppose that, you know, your work in the 90s in particular, but since as well, is that I quote, some critics have called out your urgent concern with the human condition. And you might not agree with that, but if you do, and given that people have said it, and I would agree with it as well, maybe you could start, Jagath, by elaborating on what aspects of the human condition you find most urgent and necessary and vital to address in your work, which is the first part. And the second part is, what about that condition in your art has changed since the 1990s, and what has remained the same?
Well, you can make it longer, a question. Thank you.
Well, it's a two-parter. I have to start somewhere.
No, you see, Sanjana, yes, I paint about human condition from a particular perspective. You see, I'm in my late 60s now. So what people are seeing today is a body of work done by a much younger, bit naive, less experienced, or less crafty artist than Jagath Weerasinghe today. But nonetheless, there's something going through. Let me try to tell you. You see, I grew up in a family that my father was a Samasamajist. And it's also I'm a Sinhalese Buddhist. I always keep telling this, to tell the world that my inability to be a universal citizen as such, by knowing that I cannot be a universal citizen, I can be one. Because so I know my limitations. I know what kind of forces will come against my own critical gaze towards me, or looking back, or looking to me. So there is this identity aspect, so to speak. So, okay, in one hand, I'm coming from a Marxist Samajist family, and I'm a Sinhalese Buddhist, and I did art. This is a concoction for fire. When you are a Marxist, and at the same time, you try to be a Sinhalese and a Buddhist, and then you are an artist. I think that's kind of a bit of a cursed life, or a recipe for a cursed life. And that's where the condition, when I entered the art school in late 1970s, soon after I became involved in student politics and all that, I experienced my first real life experience of lack of democracy, lack of, that you are not an individual. You're someone of, you're nothing. Like, I was attacked and abducted by some thugs while the police was looking, and taken to the head office of the political party that was in power. But then, I never thought that something like that could happen. So that's the first time I realized, well, that thing that you grew up is not actually out there. Then once I graduated, I have said this very often, I'm sure, some people might already know this, but I want to say this again and again to understand some aspects of my art and our society. And then I graduated and I left Colombo for a very temporary job as a murals conservation trainee in Dambulla. That decision of mine is a very looking back, it's a very nationalist decision. At the art school, you learned about Western art. You looked at William de Kooning, Jackson Pollock, and all these great, Western masters, which I still appreciate and great. I'm great that I had such kind of training, and so my teacher was H.A. Karunaratne. But I go to Dambulla, leaving a good job behind Colombo to do conserving Buddhist murals. Sanjana, you have to realize, this is Jagath Weerasinghe of the late 60s or late, at his age, late 60s. I'm an older person, looking back and telling, trying to make my own history. And there, you're training as you're conserving these beautiful, extremely important national Buddhist heritage. And then 1983, so 83 January, I go there. July, I come to Colombo, and I see this carnage happening, carnage done, attacking these Tamils in Colombo by whom I identify with as Sinhalese and Buddhist. That's the second thing that I could not make sense. And then 88, 89. So at all these occasions, I realized the predicament of being a thinking person, an individual. When the state perpetuates organized violence against you, you have no way to escape. You have nobody other than your own resources within you. So I'm a real confused bundle of human existence, so to speak.
Well, that is the quintessential artist, isn't it? Thanks, Jagath, for sharing that. It's always lovely to hear you recall and share your life story. I bring him up because I know that he was a dear friend. We are, I think those of us who knew him still mourn his loss. Professor Qadri Ismail likened your art to the photography. Roland Barthes was talking about photography, and in a review of your work published a couple of years ago, but also speaking to the 90s art that you put out, he said that your art bruises the viewer. And that was Barthes. Barthes was talking about photography, and for him, photography that was visceral and shook the viewer, left him or her on them uncomfortable, was the height of photography. And Qadri thought the same of your work as well. If you agree, and I think you do, what do you seek to communicate insofar as the emotional and intellectual impact on the viewer through, in particular, I suppose, let's keep it to impetus and your 90s corpus, the work that you created in that period?
Sanjana, as I told you, there was this anger in me. And in doing art, something I always wanted was to, I think, the function of art, when this kind of complex things happen in a society, is to reveal, but not just to record. Yeah, artists do record. Recording is, is also pretty important, but you also have to to record things that you don't really directly see. So in that sense, I always wanted to do art. I still do. Do art that kind of, it doesn't make you comfortable to live with. I know, early on, I have received this criticism, how there's no happiness in your art, you tax us so much, no one can live with your work, and it's all about limbs and broken arms and, whatever. My good friend, my dear friend Anjalan used to call this, the trauma school of art. But yeah, it is. I intentionally do that. I do not gentrify my emotions. I really don't like work that even try to gentrify these extremely, painful human stories. No, yeah, Kadri is quite right. Yeah.
I was going to take you to Dancing Shiva, and the idea of that work as destruction being necessary, or a foundation or a prerequisite even for peace. And if that is your art, Jagath, and particularly the 90s work that you did in that context, how do you reconcile? And I'm hazarding a guess that you are not partial to violence, that you're not a violent person insofar as physical or kinetic violence goes. You might be violent in your art, the art might be violent as well, and it might actually seek to instill some violence on those who view it. But is it the case that you want the viewer to be violent after seeing your art? Or another way of asking it is, how do you reconcile the real world or offline implications of violence, particularly in the Sri Lankan context, with the art that you produce and the emotions that it may give rise to in the viewer? How do you negotiate that?
Well, that's a tough question. I tell you, you mentioned the dancing Shiva things. Like, you see, one of the things that I cannot fathom is that how you bring in religion to justify violence. So when you see, I keep telling I'm a Sinhalese Buddhist, but then I find Sinhalese Buddhists bringing the Sinhalaness and the Buddhistness to justify violence, and then sometimes, then when you look at what Shiva was telling me, Dance of Shiva, and the story of Gandhi behind it, and the Gandhi being shot, killed by another Hindu called Godse, what I realized was, all of a sudden it struck me, when you bring in, even with good faith, religion into contemporary politics, it usually supports or prompts or it ends up promoting violence. Like, Shiva is suppressing ignorance for the benefit of, whatever. He's a cosmic dancer, he's a bit of a, he's dancing, I love that figure of Shiva. He has smoke, he has smoke, he has dancing, he has music, and doing all that is also, expressing this ignorance, the idea of ignorance. But then it's a very violent thing, even though it's a dance. And then through this, you can always justify violence when it brings to democratic politics. So that is why I found, you see, I always say this, like, you just have to acknowledge your capacity to be an idiot if you want to be, not to be one. So you have to acknowledge your capacity to be violent. This is what happened to me in 1983. For a second, was like, in 1983, I thought, like, this is inevitable. Tamils are also responsible for this. I never thought that I would be thinking like that, being a Marxist and a Buddhist. But then I realized, okay, guy, there is this enemy within you, or this thing within you, which will always try to justify violence if it hurts your grade or the structures given to you. So this is what I try to tell you, try to engage with my Shiva paintings. Yeah. Well, you have to know, you can never stop violence. You just have to negotiate with it forever. This is what I
Yeah, and I suppose it's a personal question as well, right? I mean, it's a personal quest as well to constantly negotiate it even before you create your art as an individual, I would imagine, particularly given what you said you had gone through at the start of our conversation, and that would also be an inkling of the totality of that experience as well. But here's the thing, Jagath. We come to the heart of the question, as it were. You speak about all of this. And then the consideration is that you are now one of Sri Lanka's most sought after artists, both for the work that you exhibit from decades ago and the work that you now go on to create, and the work, of course, for the rest of your life that you will go on to produce as well. Collectors love you. Buyers want you. Galleries want to exhibit you.
Some collectors, some buyers, yes, yeah.
And they, you command a price. And
Yes.
so, in the broadest sense of that question that I want to pose to you, this interplay between price, your politics, the country's politics, and the way profit gets into all of this, and the fact that artists have to live as well. Revisiting your 90s art, and maybe even decades earlier, you yourself talked about the dangers of and the possibility of co-option by the system and the market. How have you tried to negotiate your integrity, given the fact that the context that we talked about and the money that the art commands? And I guess, at a very personal level, I wanted to ask you, connected to that, when your art, and I can safely say, I think, fetches millions of rupees now, that which you captured in a very political way that you have described to us, even in this conversation, now probably hangs in the bedroom, boardroom, or living room of somebody who may not appreciate that which you painted and the intent behind it, but moreover, somebody like even me will never be able to see it. So it then raises the question, how do you deal with that when you have, I would imagine, have created that art for a broader appreciation?
Yep.
But now it turns out that it's just a very limited gaze in all its senses that your art is captured by. So are you hostage to it? Have you reconciled yourself to it? Or is it something that you think about and are uncomfortable with?
Okay.
Well, I mean, that's a broad, maybe
yeah.
those were some thoughts I had, and you can respond.
Okay. I'm
really
trying to be how dishonest I should be here right now. That's my question, not honest. But no, I'm just kidding. You see, I am very aware of this. I have not stopped doing art that for my own pains. I do art to make sense of the world. Things are all screwed up. But that's not the way. Let me head on answer your question. Yes, we are always co-opted. We are always being de-radicalized. But I thought of this, in our preliminary discussion, you raised this not in this really brutal way, but in a much milder manner. Had I known that you would put it in this brutal format, I would have thought of it more. I thought of it but I seriously think, when someone buys my art, they are also aware of this. People do research, and I think that they also align with it in a particular way. I don't think, take for example, Who Are You, Soldier work. I think it's one of the most crafty artworks that I did at the peak of the war. What I wanted to say was, I want to have a kind of a sympathetic look at this individual we call soldier, whose identity, whose human suffering is erased under the label of Ranavirua, or his individual identity is taken out. This is applicable to soldiers everywhere, because we cannot think of a world without soldiers as such. And at the same time, I did another series about the suicide bombers, where the media would want to think of them as monsters. But what I want to do with these images, I don't know who has this suicide bomber. I don't have any of these works anymore. I would love to have one. But then why did people in this, coming back to my Who are you, soldier work? You know that it's a soldier, but you don't see the face. It's a background is either murky or gold. When it is murky, you have like a printer's strip on like you have the colors of the Buddhist flag. So I think when you have that work, you can also look at it as a good composition. But at the same time, I don't think that my gaze, my political idea can ever be erased from that, because it's a soldier, it's a guy without a face. You just have to give it an identity. So once again, yes, there was a time that I realized that my work was getting very, very de-radicalized. As was the first time when I had a show at Barefoot Gallery, the whole show was sold out. I did not paint like that. It was a series of painting called My Inability Painting Woman Outside of Art History. That whole exhibition was almost sold out within a couple of days or like. I thought, like, how come? How come, people like this work? I didn't paint like that. So I do challenge the system. But then, because I have to tell you, it's nothing great about me, because I can do it because I'm also a university professor. I'm well paid. I was well paid by that, so I could do it. Yeah. I do not expect it from younger artists, but I did it when I was also not well paid as beginning. I took my risks, but that's me. You see, this is the difference between me and some of my other artists. I don't want everyone to follow take the same risky decision because I could, but I'm only mad at people when they don't take it. Yeah, that's the only point. Like, you cannot ask the younger people. They have to, find a hole. But then my point is, coming back to your difficult question. Yes, at some time I feel very frustrated that, I'm very happy about the current exhibition and people can see it, but I would have been very happy if there was a national institution where they are installed and people can see it. It is their history. It's our suffering and pain. But then we don't have. But I'm also glad that the local wealthy people are collecting them, some of them, which is, well, I know you have this sinister smile.
No, well, no, don't read into my expression a way out of the conundrum that you're going to have in answering the question that I posed. What I did want to ask, and maybe give you a way out, or maybe even not, is that, it might be the irony of 2023's Sri Lanka, that those who can afford your art may purchase it so that nobody has to see it, even themselves. And that is a way of capturing and erasing, in a sense, that which is inconvenient and illuminated by your art.
I have a direct answer. No, they buy it not because of the content of art, because now, I have a certain kind of a cultural capital. They own Jagath Weerasinghe, and they're proud to show during their occasions and ceremonies. Even though you can live with this hideous art, I still have it.
Well, that's a far more cynical take than I would ever have imagined.
But I know that, you look at this work, that the death under the boat tree, that was which Sunistra Bandaranaike had for a long time. That's a very painful work for me. Because a sister of a friend of mine died when the LTT attacked the boat tree, and I heard it. I was in Rome, and the first thing I did when I come back when I returned home with the oil colors and art material that I bought in Rome is to do this painting in the mural painting conservation studio in Kandy, the corner of that old building. And I think people react to that because it's a rather nice modernist work of art, even though it's about death.
That's something that you said about the institution that you could, house or curate or archive yours and other artists' work as well. I want to come to that around the politics and the optics and the challenges of memorialization and doing that kind of thing. But, an aspect of what you actually touched upon is that your art, and we've talked about this, is painful. It's a painful journey to create it. It's a painful journey to engage with it. It's a painful journey to understand the context that gave rise to it and what it depicts and the layers of it. I've always enjoyed that. And I have found myself always questioning and reading and interrogating myself and reading more to understand what you produce. But Jagath, what the hell do you want viewers to do with your art? We've talked about it angering, we've talked about its violence, we've talked about its, what Kadri said about it. It's a heavy art. When somebody sees, goes to SFG, sees impetus, understands the context and the milieu that it came from, arose from, and then contemplates, if one is Sri Lankan, what the hell has changed since the 90s? And you go with this anger, you go with this frustration, you probably go with a deep sadness as well, and ennui. So what the hell do you want viewers to do when they see your art? What would you desire as the artist, them to feel or do or act after they engage with what you produced? And it could be impetus in the 90s, but it could be the stuff afterwards as well.
Well, you see, when I do art, one thing that I'm good at is not to think about my audience or my viewer as such. Sometimes it comes into your head, but it comes into my head as my close friends. Like, perhaps you come in, or Kadri used to come, what would Kadri think about this? I really used to think, like, what would Sanjana react to this? Or what would Tenu think about this? What I would say, like, oh, my Prasanna Ranababu or someone, all these people close to me. I don't think of the art market as such. And what I want them to, I don't really have any expectations from the audience as such. But I know one thing. See, we have not been living in a peaceful place for the past 30, 40 years, even relatively peaceful. There is all this major, in my point of view, problem that could be easily solved. But with the system of statecraft is keeping them unresolved for some reason, which is beyond my comprehension. So, those are very simple things, like, when I was in Kilinochchi doing my recent work with the Kilinochchi mothers who have, I wouldn't say have lost, they gave their children to the state, they gave it to the army, and they're not come back. It's not during the war, it's after the war. I mean, how could that, this is a very simple thing. In my understanding, you have won the war, so to speak, and then these parents gave their children, but you have to disappear them. See, these are, I don't have any rational way to understand it. So in these works, this is what I'm trying to remind, if I can, like, these highly complex, painful stories that others live with. I think I'm making the story now. Why don't live with my work, with that pain? I'm not gentrifying. I'm not cleansing any of the raw emotions for you to, for it to be palatable to your
That's
taste.
correct. Yeah. I mean, let's bring it forward. And I know we've talked about this. We talked about it last time we had a conversation for the earlier series of the Support Local Art series about Aragalaya. And for viewers who are not from Sri Lanka, Aragalaya means struggle in Sinhalese. It captured a period in 2022 when the country imploded, leading to the then president's departure, the economic collapse of the country, and in a sense, a lot of socio-political, socio-cultural, socio-technological developments that were not just unprecedented, but it was an unprecedented moment and a movement in the country as well. And Jagath, you've been thinking, talking, interrogating, and in the heart of it, actually you were in the country while the rest of us were not, and only engaging from afar. But we've talked about quite a bit about the fact that it was a pivotal moment, an epochal moment. And I wanted to tie it to what you yourself have coined for your 90s art. Trend is the term that you called it, as a socially conscious art, and then bring it forward to 2022 Sri Lanka and the Aragalaya, and ask you how important is I suppose is a living thing. You can't say the Aragalaya was, in 2022, but how important a moment was it in your own artistic development, but also in terms of the art that you've created since the 90s, with regards to that interrogation of politics through art that was and is uncomfortable as well?
You see, well, I'll tell you my thoughts about Aragalaya, but I will tell you my involvement. I did not involve in Aragalaya in a big time, but I did take part in it, But most of my generation artists, we have this Tirtha International Artist Collective. A lot of Tirtha artists took part, and I saw many people using performance art as a way to protest. And artists like Pala Potipitiya, Janani Kure, and others, even our own work that we did this big screen for. We had it installed in that cinema. What's it called? That whatever. Then
Gota Go at GGG.
Yeah, at the Godagogam, they had a cinema.
Yeah,
no?
They had. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
What's it called?
I forget it, but they had the Pustakala, they had a library, they had a cinema, they had a stage.
In the cinema, we had this installed, our huge curtain, and it was organized by Jagath Weerasinghe and Naomi and all these guys. So, but Aragalaya, that is the amount of my involvement. I was not, there for 24 hours, day and night. No, and I was a keen observer of it also while I was participating in these ways. Aragalaya, I think, went through two distinct phases. For me, Aragalaya is an extremely important thing. You have to try to theorize it. You should not condemn it as such, because it had its own inertia. It came its own way, spearheaded by in my understanding, a specific kind of young men and women based in the urban environment, and then it became a mass movement. Early days of like the first 2 months or whatever, it had its own. It had this extremely challenging edge to it. There was no organized political party and all that. There was no Marx. There was no Lenin. There was no nothing. That was, so what it told me in that sense is great. This is what I expected as an artist when we formed the Tirtha International Artist Collective. We were a group. We got together on our own, myself, Anoli Perra, Bandhu Manamperi, Sarath Kumar Siri, Pradeep Chansiri, Pushpa Kumar Kolra, and we made our own crucible of thinking and protest. And Tenu and Vibhavidi, in a way, what happened this is my way of seeing, what happened at Aragalaya is a large-scale thing that we and people like Tenu, myself, and Anoli and all this kind did in the art scene. Challenge the status quo, not based on any political party. But later on, I thought it could always happen. I took it a different turn, and it was taken over by political parties, and I think it kind of lost its realistic understanding of its power, and that allowed the state to crush it. Because my expectation, very ideal, usual, thought to Aragalaya to be until the next election. That was, I was talking to my colleagues and it has to be there. But well, as an artist, I'm always ideal, but I did not, because it became a bit nasty, violent, and you cannot blame Aragalaya for that. The idea of Aragalaya is a historical phenomenon which we have to understand. So what happened is, my work, current body of work, which some of the images I sent to you about, that's when I got myself stuck on the idea of this very 17th century early political philosopher Leviathan, Hobbes, the idea of this idea of this savior, and the idea of human nature. Anyway, I'm still Aragalaya will stay with me for a long time. for me to make sense of it. It's like 1983, 83 changed something in me. And Aragale has left something for a long time in me because it was fantastic, experience to see that, a group of young people could do that. And they achieved what they wanted. And anyway, see, I always tell my good friends who do not like the idea of the Aragale, I said, no, don't do that. You're doing a historical mistake. Please be patient with it. Don't judge it from its end, judge it from its beginning. And how did it happen? Who led it? Who are these people? And how they could have, look at the national integration aspects, the Tamil sing the anthem in Tamil language. This may be very populist thing, but they did it. They did it in there in front of the whole parliament. These are some energy we have. This is why you can always keep faith in this country. They are at the most unacceptable, and at the deepest level of frustration, it comes up. That maybe you might think that is another nationalist coming up from Jagath, but this is my faith about this place.
No,
I believe in this country always. I always believe in this country. Well, it's like asking me whether you like rice and curry. What else should I like? That's it is not in my favorite. If you ask what is my favorite food, I wouldn't say rice and curry because you don't have to say that is your favorite curry. It's the same thing. Like, what is your best country in the world? Of course, this country. What else? Anyway, I don't know if I answered your question. That's how I think about Aragale.
Quite right. I mean, you can have a conversation and not get any greater clarity on. I believe that there were many Aragaleas. We have to talk about in the plurality of it. And the diversity of it. Maybe that the singular is a inapplicable and inappropriate way to also think about it as well, whether it's top down, horizontal, where it was. We don't talk about necessarily the Aragalea in Kandy or in Gaul. We talk about it at GGG. So there were many things happening. We don't talk about the north and the east in the Aragalea. We talk about representations of it. So, that could be an entire conversation, but I wanted to locate it in your own Ubra, in a sense, from the 90s onwards, in that socially conscious art trend.
Sanjana, when I see it, look, even when 88, 89 and 83 and all that, in a way, what I'm looking at is the relationship between the idea of the state and the people.
Yeah.
The individual. So the Aragalaya gave me another very complicated angle or relationship between the idea of the state and the people. Because you see, in the end, it is the people you say, get rid of the 226 people in the parliament, but that's a good rhetoric. But when you really analyze it, it doesn't make sense as such, but you just say that. But anyway.
Again, I don't want to be sidetracked by Aragale alone. Just to remind viewers that you could pop in your question to the Q&A functionality on Zoom, well, at least on Zoom. If it is on Facebook, my dear colleagues at the gallery will, I suppose, send me your question over WhatsApp. So whichever way you're looking at this live stream should allow you a way to ask questions, and we will talk for about 10 to 15 minutes more and then open it up for any questions that you have. Jagath, I want to take us back to that point you made about an institution to hold art. And I wanted to take it into this really fraught area of the politics and the challenges of memorialization. And if the institution is a state one, given that the state is an architect of this violence, and violence so heinous that it beggars belief. I mean, you talked about the mothers in Kilinochchi, and you said it was complicated. At some level, it's not complicated. It's a very simple violence. The banality of violence, like Arendt said, is sometimes the most horrible to contemplate, the most impossible to contemplate. And you've always, as an artist, tossed between art that engages with, that private memorialization of remembering. Sometimes maybe when somebody comes to see your art, they remember who they are and what they are and what they are part of and what their identity is or what they've lost or what they've done to engineer that loss. and also the more public ways of memorializing. You've been involved in the shrine, exactly, and what happened to that. There might be more initiatives and endeavors in the future that you're involved with, which attempt to memorialize. So in your life as an artist, and given the country that you have lived through, what hope is there for a meaningful memorialization of that which you have captured and attempted to interrogate through your art?
I don't know how to answer that, but I think me and Tenu and few others are involved in a project to that end, but of course with the support of the on the request of the state. I cannot say much about it, but Sanjana, we all know that sometimes in my work, what I've tried to enter, the pain is also cultural. It's also socially constructed. But beyond that social and culturally constructed pain, there is a real, I believe, a human suffering as well. Through my art, that is what I try to bring to focus. But when you memorialize, in the process of memorialization, what kind of pain are we going to preserve? It's it will always be the socially constructed pain, or socially you see, am I correct in saying that? What did I try to do what I tried to do at Shrine of the Innocents, at some point, when I was talking to the mothers of Mbilipitiya who lost their school children, they asked a very simple question. Isn't the rest of the world concerned about our pain? We couldn't give our children a decent funeral. So I made them to squeeze some clay and to burn it, and then it went to the memorial. So you see, that was a very human question they asked. It is not against the state. They don't. So even the Mbilipitiya mothers ask the same thing. It's a very simple thing. We gave our children. We want to know what happened to them. You see, like these are but when the state is going to support memorializing that pain and suffering, what shape it would take is a challenge that I'm dealing with right now. In the Shrine of the Innocents, I had my once again I did it. When I called it Shrine of the Innocents, I put it into an institutional idea of the shrine, and I call it the Shrine of the Innocents. And I used the idea of archaeology. You walk into a mound, and there, so it's always get an idea of socially constructed. I don't know what I'm talking.
Well, I mean, perhaps the viewer might find in what you said the struggle also to, that you are going to negotiate that.
The pain, the thing that I is that, these mothers, we can never make them, give their children back, and they will.
No, you can't.
With that pain and suffering. There's nothing I can do about, nothing we can do about, and we just have to cry with them.
Well, that's not entirely true, because you are doing something about it. Your art is a response. Your art is maybe a way and no, but hey, I'm going to make you uncomfortable, because my question was, and it's not what we talked about, but as you were talking, I was wondering. And it's a genuine question. I don't want to put you in the hard spot, but I think this conversation is so interesting. Okay. Is it an expiation of the Sinhala Buddhist guilt as well that you kind of try to work through in your artistic production?
I have a real good answer. You see, I believe that. I think that there is that aspect of it. See, whenever if you ask me who I think is the best intellectuals that really understood the problem in Sri Lanka, I have two people to name, and none of them are Sinhala Buddhists. It is Kadri and Pradeep Jagannathan. If you read their writings, they understand what I'm trying to do in my art, so to speak, the problem with the idea of the people and the state. And I question, why is it that I find it very hard to find a Sinhala author who can pitch to that sensitivity. No one, in my opinion. See, you read what Pradeep Jagannathan has written in this, his Netraj, any of his essays, there is, they don't give you a good answer right away. They take you through this, complex relationship between the idea of the state and the people. It's not that the state did this, they don't say that. Also the idea of Tamil nationalism and single nationalism, how they work together and all this, So yes, when you are a single, well, I don't know how my colleagues would react to this. I think when you are a Sinhalese and a Buddhist, when you are from the South, you work with a particular sense of a certain sense of guilt, of course. It's like the way that the British people, young, intellectuals think about us. They also carry a certain guilt about it. Their grandparents left this place a mess. Anyway, I don't know. That's an easy question. I do agree with that. And I think I have it.
Yeah, I mean, you started the conversation and you talked about it elsewhere as the cognitive inability of yourself to describe yourself or to, be comfortable with the identity of a singular Buddhist. So I would expect that. So that answer doesn't surprise me. Jagath, I'm going to stop, with what I had in mind and go to a question because it kind of relates to what we've been talking about that I got from Zoom. There's another question coming up, but it was to ask you how do you understand your role as an archaeologist and archaeology itself, especially the state-led aspect of preserving and celebrating and essentially Sinhala Buddhist legacy and heritage?
No, I have talked about this issue a lot. Yeah, no, you see, archaeology as a discipline is usually very nationalist. It has been nationalist. And one of the main mistakes we have done is translating archaeological data into ethnic data. And the archaeology has this history of Sinhala Buddhist aspects ingrained into it. We are very difficult to make. It's very simple when you look at Sri Lanka, 3rd century Sri Lanka. Now I'm talking. This is Jagath Weerasinghe, the archaeologist. The archaeologist. Yeah. My good friend Dr. Vidana Pathiran, this wonderful research of the ancient road network of Sri Lanka. So this is not historical past. This is the archaeological past of Sri Lanka. Whoever asked that question, I like that question. So it gives me this opportunity to tell the world about it. She showed us how well connected Sri Lanka has been as an island by a road network. All these roads ends up in a port. There are about, 100, 120 or 30 ports around the island. All these ports are linked to this by this road network. So Anuradhapura is linked to Jaffna, Magam, and everything. So point one, very interesting point. So anyone who is in Anuradhapura could think of the edges of this country. Just think about someone in the center of India or in Europe. They cannot think of the edge. They can only think of the center. But in Sri Lanka, it's like the nation state today. Today, we think of the edge of Sri Lanka through names of villages or towns. But those days, they would have thought through those roads and the ports. And then another colleague of mine, Dr. Arjuna Tantilage, did this wonderful study on the copper production in the east of Sri Lanka at Seruvavila. So he had archaeology. This is not history. This is not historical past. This is archaeological past. He has archaeologically proved that there was industrial scale copper production in Seruvavila from 4th century BC to 12th century AD. All right. And then you look at South India. South India has so many Buddhist sites from 3rd century downward. And if you look at Asoka's edicts, Asoka sends the people, not only to there's Tambapan, that is Sri Lanka, and to Kerala and some other place. So they treat it as one. So what is the subject formation of the 4th century BC then? See, you have all these Buddhist sites in South India and Sri Lanka, you have Buddhist sites. So what about North? So it's not Sinhala Buddhist, it is Buddhist. It could be very well Sinhala Buddhist or Tamil Buddhist. This truth, we do not want to accept. But now archaeologically, we are being forced to make sense of it now. No, it's a very different archaeological past we have. The historical past is different. Mahavamsa says something, Anuradhapura is the origin of civilization. No, archaeologically we see at the time Anuradhapura was experiencing the first phase of urbanization. The same thing was happening in Jaffna, at Jaffna Fort area. This is archaeology. This is not historical past. So what I have to tell the person who asked this, yes, we are not, to think about our past, we always look at the historical past only. And we use archaeology to support our idea of historical past. But the archaeological past is very different. And the anthropological past could be even more different. We think the Ravana is the beginning of this country. That is anthropology. All right. I think I did answer that question.
Well, I suppose that was a comprehensive one to the person who answered it. And I don't know whether they're young, old, or indifferent to their age.
Yeah.
But you might have made that day if by calling them young. It was a very interesting question. Thank you. We have another one. I am curious about the state response to your work. And I suppose this is in relation to our conversation about memorialization as well, in addition to all of what we've talked about. And the question goes on, especially considering there is suppression of media in Sri Lanka. Was it challenged by them? And would you say your work reached the masses outside of Colombo? Very good questions, actually.
Yeah, actually, no. The masses outside.
No to what? No to which?
So no to my art, our art, not just my art or Tenu's art or Anoli's art or Bandhu Manamperi. So, the visual art has a very special place in modern
city. Jagath, just to clarify, that was a two-parter, right? So was it challenged by the state? And you're answering the fact that it didn't go outside Colombo?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Our art was, good question. You see, at one point, they were challenged by not the state. You see, this, censorship is not coming from the state usually, but those people who think that they are part of the state is coming. There are certain monks sometimes. Even Bandhu Manamperi had that problem. My Shrine of the Innocent was criticized for using the word shrine, using the word Aramea. Aramea is a very Buddhist concept. It has this, Jetavana Aramea and all this Aramea. So, but actually, state doesn't care about our art, so to speak. This is so. If you say state challenged our art, no, it is not so in that way. But we had problems with So when I had my first show in 1992, there was this broken school pass. There were people very upset about it. In Sri Lanka, you don't have broken stupas. You have ruined stupas or brand new ones. So I inserted a third category of stupas, which was very challenging. But then the audience was very mixed about it. So they were lost between ruined and broken. So yeah, my direct answer is no. But there was resistance from people, some groups, but it never came, we did not have the same pressure as our filmmakers had. Say Prasanna Vitanage or Vimukti had much more pressure. Or Sanjeeva, that boy. You know what I mean? Yeah. Because visual art has a certain distance to most people. They don't see it as a threat. But film and songs, they find it as more popular. That's my very honest response to that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we'll wait for some more questions, but I wanted to kind of talk about that because the decapitated heads and the broken stupas are really, for me, there's this word metonymic, they symbolize, they stand in for, they communicate death, killing, and murder. And it's been running through the 90s and the militarization aspects. You talked about the soldier as well. Has the Jagath of in his 60s and a more mellower Jagath, when you look back now at the walls of SFG and Impetus, do you think that you have, from your younger self, changed to a degree where you can accommodate more violence and not be angered by it? Because it's a human thing, right?
No. I wish.
Or are you still as angry but less able to create?
No. I wish I were less angry and my work was a bit more pleasing. I actually think sometimes, I always think of, this Nanda Malini's famous song, when we are dead, you might be able to sing better songs. I love that, part, in Pavana. No, I cannot. No, sometimes I do these small things, but when I'm in front of my empty canvas, it always a different challenge, an empty canvas is the biggest challenge an artist, a painter. I'm a painter, basically. But yeah, and the Aragale has brought that idea back of, to not to give up, to, not to make not to be nice. I wish I were, sometimes you don't change very much, but of course I have changed, the way that I speak and all that anyway.
We talked about the mothers in Kilinochchi and Ambilipitia, could you elaborate a bit about the differences between the responses to the clay representations?
So I did the same thing with the same thing when I gave them clay, and I said
the clay,
squeeze it, as if you are, put your pain and suffering to this thing, you are also it's like a small fetus, and then I think I will, burn it. So they like doing it, but they said they didn't want to burn it. Well, they didn't have to explain to me why. So the Ambilipitia mothers, by the time they met me with the idea of the memorial, the Suryakanda mass graves were uncovered, So they knew that their children are dead. But these mothers are not ready to give up. And I loved it. They began to cry and all that. The thing that really made me sad was, in the end, they asked me, when are you coming back, sir? But there's no reason. It's they even said that, they are going to keep one of those clay things with them. So when they ask me, when are you coming back? They know that I don't have any solution to their problem, but I realized they liked what they did in the end. They all this time they were used to go to protest with these placards, But here they are doing the same, that protesting, but in a very different way. They became part of it. They actually, they get really engaged in it. Yeah, the difference was they have not given hope of their children, which is understandable. They shouldn't, I guess.
I want to, because in our last conversation, Shana was part of it as well. Shana, and for those listening to this video stream live or in a recorded form, is one of our most gifted contemporary artists and resides in and comes from and calls home the north of Sri Lanka and Jaffna in particular. The question of Jagath I want to ask is, from the 90s or perhaps even from those, I don't think I'm wrong to use the formative moment of July 83. In your conversations with non-Sinhala Buddhist identities, attempting to do what you do, in a comparable way or through other artistic forms as well, maybe from the country, maybe Muslim, maybe Tamil, maybe Burger, or foreign as well. What have you in those conversations, and maybe 90s as well, what did you discover as the sharpest differences? The similarities I can understand, but what are the sharpest differences in how that gaze to your mind?
I don't know how to answer that question. Let me think. Can you ask the same thing?
I mean, for example, I'm putting words in his mouth, but would a Shana think more about or differently about militarization because it's a fact of life that you and I, as Sinhala Buddhists with a Weerasinghe and a Hattotuwa, would not engage with, or would engage with in a very, very different way?
Yeah, okay. At least in my case, I engage with it as if I'm part of the problem.
Yes, correct.
That's what I understand. If I think I'm not
so
part
that would be a big difference, right?
That's a big difference. And Sanak does not have to do that. He cannot do that. And and also what you see, sometimes until 88, 89 happened in the south of Sri Lanka, that was what was happening was news and images. The violence happening in the north of Sri Lanka. But then 88, 89 happened. And then when it happened, what we realized that to the war, the machinery of war, the race and the creed and the caste doesn't matter. It is just what it is. You don't need rocket science to understand how violent our army could have been in the north from how violent they were in the south. I don't need anyone to give me major lectures or major statistics to make sense of it, right? And, being a Sinhalese and a Buddhist as such, a critical one, while being critical, I still claiming myself to be, it's a very, it's difficult. I think when I don't want to escape. I don't want to, so it could be very easy and comfortable to say, I'm a citizen of the world, I'm a universal person. I don't have any idea of my nationality. I think I would be self-deceiving. I'll be trying to deceive the rest of the world. No, I am part of the problem, so to speak. And I'm a teacher, I'm a university professor, I'm a heritage manager, I'm in this, I'm at the center of this crisis, so to speak, in a conceptual way.
No, 100%. Because you also talked about, that impulse for collective violence, and you've also said, nationalism and racism is in the air that we breathe.
Yeah. It's unbelievable how some of my good friends sometimes, just look at it, that's not the way. They use, some of my junior colleagues, they're very, very decent people. All of a sudden come out a particular language. I just don't know. It's not like, don't say it is apparata, it is also, this is, one way of that they try to confront me is, sir, make a apparata. What do you mean apparata? Is the question, like, then they don't know what to say, like, so, we breathe. People don't know that they're breathing it. We think we are very good Buddhists.
Yeah, I mean, that use of decent is an interesting word. I've found that the most racist individuals are the most decent of people.
Yes,
or appear to be, who claim that they have good Tamil and Muslim friends. Any other questions? We have, I think, maybe one or two more we can entertain. Please ask them through the chat, or the chat or the Q&A functionality on Zoom. Alternatively, if you're looking at this from any other platform, drop in your question wherever you can, and the gallery staff will push it through to me. But Jagath, from me, the last question would be, however long we have on this earth, and you've sent me photos of what looks to be a fantastic interrogation. I don't know whether you're Ubermensch or want to be, but it's going to be an interesting play on Leviathan. But, would you see yourself as bearing witness in the way that you have, like you in the 90s, like since till the rest of your life? Or will there come a point of time when the Jagath Weerasinghe in his 80s may say, enough, I now want to,
I also say that to myself.
Go retire, spend time with the children maybe, and then, to hell with the rest of it.
All monkeys never come to the earth, no, they always keep jumping. You see, I have on this wall a couple of lines like, forget the postgraduate Institute of Archaeology, get out of the Central Cultural Fund. I have it hanging there. But,
How long have you had it though?
I have it since about now 3 years. It's enough is enough. Spend more time in doing art. But here I am not but this is the way it works for me. You see, I think it's the way that it works for our generation of artists. We are caught. This is what something I learned from my professor Sanjana Hattotuwa, which he got from Frantz Fanon. Sometimes there is a responsibility on your shoulder. Either you can betray it or you can fulfill it. Most interesting point is Fanon used the word opaquely or something like that. See, but people like me or Tenu or Anoli or Bandhu or Sarat Kumar, we do it because we are artists. We are not opaque. We are not, we are always seen by others. But my point is, but in the field of archaeology, that's what I'm doing. Having this major attack on nationalist, racist, and populist tendencies that that twist archaeological facts and ideas about the past, mixing archaeology and history and anthropology together to serve a particular end. So that fight of mine is not seen unless you are in the field of archaeology or unless you come to my classes. So I don't think I will ever be, I would always think of, giving up, not doing, start doing some beautiful paintings and all that. But then, what is beautiful on the end?
Well, I mean, that's a fantastic way to end our session. Frantz Fanon is an interesting writer that you brought up, and the phrase Jagath was relative opacity. In the wretched of the earth. And I wanted to kind of also end maybe in a quote I remember, that each generation must discover its mission and fulfill or betray it in relative opacity. That's a quote from the book. And I think that you embody that. It's so interesting that you brought that up. I think the conversation has brought that up as well. I once again encourage those who are in the country, in Sri Lanka and in Colombo, to please, you have 2 weeks more up until 30th of September 2023 to go see Jagath's Impetus, curated by Mariam Begum at the Saskia Fernando Gallery. I desperately wanted, and wished, I was in the country to see Jagath, but I know that when I do return, it'll be wonderful seeing you again in person and talking much more and in much greater length about all these questions, which in a sense will always remain unanswered. So thank you very much for joining the Saskia Fernando Gallery and myself again for this wonderful conversation.
Thank you, Sanjana. Thanks for all these wonderful questions, but difficult. Anyway, I think I did answer them as much as I could.
I think we covered a lot of ground. So thank you also for those from Sri Lanka, but other parts of the world who joined us live. And we hope that you took something away from our conversation.